Welcome everyone to another informative video where I'm going to be talking a lot. So if that's not your thing, you can tune away. But if you maybe want to learn something new or repeat something related to base training, you should maybe stick around. But yeah, so in this video, I'll be going through what base training is, how you can use it, and my advice on how to implement it and what to think about. And during the presentation, I will be maybe using some terminology from my previous video. So if you hear something that maybe sounds a little bit odd or something maybe outside of what you're used to, it might be because I'm using like my own perspective on running and my own analogy of running training. So if you're interested in that, in my perspective on how I view running and structuring running training, definitely check it out. It's about 25 minutes, so I will be talking a lot in that video. But there is a lot of different types of training, and there is something called running periodization, meaning that you have different ways to train related to where you are in the season or how far away from race day you are. And it is usually in this type of structure where you have the taper, where before a race you tune down the mileage and you try to perform or get the body ready to perform in its best ability. And recently there is some studies and a lot of high-end athletes in the pro scene which actually don't feel that the taper has that much of an effect. So they actually don't taper traditionally, but it's still very new. This negligence of tapering. I don't think that's the right pronunciation, but I hope you can understand that. Some people don't taper before their race, but yeah, then you have the peak part of your training, which you have a lot of specific work to your race. For a marathon runner, they might be doing a lot of race pace efforts or even slightly faster at half marathon, but usually in a longer duration and longer intervals, and a lot of continuous threshold rather than split up interval thresholds. But I'll be going through a little bit more about that later on. And then you have a build phase, which you might be increasing the intensity a little bit and having the mileage more adapted to your race, meaning that if you're a 10K runner, you might not be running 240 kilometers a week, but it all depends on the individual athletes. Some people prefer high mileage, some people don't, and even all the way from 5K to the marathon. There are different ways to structure, and people prefer different types of mileage. But yeah, here in the build phase, you get the body ready for more specific work. You introduce a little faster running, but still not all out. And then you have the base training, which I will be going through today. And this base period suits or fits in the way that it gets the body ready for more intense work with a lot of easy, low to moderate intensity work, usually in a longer duration, and combined with a lot of running technique specific drills. Like uphill running is a great and common way people train during this period, where they have short bursts of uphill running that really focuses on technique and improves their strength. A lot of strength training is also very beneficial here, where you focus on your maybe muscular imbalances, because you have a lot of time to fit into that strength training, as opposed to maybe during the peak phase where you have a lot of tough running. But yeah, I like to think of it as building your bow, and that goes back to my previous video where if you have a good foundation, you have a good and strong bow, you can fire the arrows even further and more precise. And some people like to use the pyramid where the base is at the bottom, and you have to have a really good base in order to fit even faster running into that schedule. That's also a way you can see it. And then I have this graph which shows the relation between volume and intensity compared to where in the phase of running you are. And as you can see in the very early time in training, you have lower intensity, but you have a lot of high volume mileage at lower intensities. And that is because you want to build up that aerobic base, meaning where you run with oxygen using the aerobic energy systems, as opposed to during closer to the competition phase where you have a lot of more quality work, meaning high intensity training, targeting the anaerobic energy system as the aerobic. It's worth mentioning that you always train both. You don't ignore one totally. You always want to have a good stimulus on both. But there's a different focus. But yeah, the volume drops as closer to competition you get. So, what is the role of base training? Well, it has several different benefits, but mainly it is to build the aerobic endurance. And here you can see the anatomical or physiological side of it, where you want to have strong mitochondria, with a high mitochondrial density and just a stronger ability to produce energy while still being in a low intensity. And that is, people usually like the zone 2 or zone 1 running. You can use that analogy. I prefer running with a different view, but that will be a whole different video. But yeah, basically you want to stimulate the lower threshold and the aerobic way to produce power or energy. But during this phase as well, you really want to focus on the running technique. I mentioned a previous example with uphill running. That's a great way to implement both strength training and aerobic training to the base phase, because you have to have a good technique when running faster uphill. And it's also something like a hidden threshold training and hidden speed work. But I will be going through that in a bit. And you have a lot of strides during this phase as well. You should be doing strides during every phase, of course. But here you also have a stronger focus on your technique, where you can even have more specific running drills related to your own personal weaknesses in your form. And that's all individual. And also, this phase suits or aims to prevent injury as well. You get the body ready for more intense training by having a lot of high mileage, low intensity work combined with shorter repetitions or shorter durations of faster running. And by working like that, ignoring the VO2 max session, for example, you lower the strain on the muscles and the tendons. And yeah, I have another graph or table here which shows the different energy systems. And as you can see, there are three main ones. The first one, the creatine phosphate one, is anaerobic, meaning that you don't need oxygen for it to work. And this is very simplified, but in short reps or short duration, meaning less than maybe 15 seconds, this system is used. And that is explosiveness, very high power output, but in a very short duration. And here in the base training, you use a little bit of this when doing the strides and stuff like that. But mostly what you want to focus on is the aerobic system, which, as you can see, not a high energy or power output, but a very consistent, and you can really prolong this energy system, meaning that you can go further with this energy system. And that is why during the base phase, you have a lot of low intensity, but longer duration workouts. like the long run or threshold work, which is continuous, as opposed to interval training. But you can't forget the upper aerobic energy system, which uses glucose as primary energy source. Uh, Worth mentioning is that the aerobic system primarily uses fat as an energy source. Um, so yeah, if you're someone who maybe doesn't train at the elite or higher end and you want to go down in fat percentage, the aerobic intensity or the energy system is the one you want to target when training. But yeah, that's also a whole different video because it's a lot of you can go really deep dive into that one. So what is the base training? Well, as I mentioned before, it's the phase where you prepare the body for faster running, and you have a lot of aerobic endurance here, where you have the lower to moderate intensity. If people want to go by zone training, it's usually below zone 4. So you ignore the zone 5, like the traditional way to do zone 5 training. For example, in a peak phase, you don't do a lot of that. But during this phase, you have the ability to log a lot of mileage compared to different phases because you focus on the lower end intensities, which is often less impact on the joints and the muscle. So you can actually run a lot more because of this. And this doesn't mean that you ignore the moderate to higher intensities fully. You still want to have that stimulus that evolves the anaerobic energy systems, but it's definitely not a higher priority than the lower end intensity zones. But yeah, as I mentioned before, you want to focus on the mitochondrial growth, the mitochondrial health. As you know, it's the powerhouse of the cell. And when Zone 2 training took its popularity through the roof, people always emphasize training the mitochondria. And you can't really ignore it. But yeah, I have a graph to the right which show the progress of how your fitness evolves after training. So as you can see, every time the line jumps down, that is after training. And you can look at this graph as a micro cycle, even a mesocycle, but even in the bigger picture of a macro cycle. But basically, after training, your body needs time to recover. And after it recovers, you have this adaptation that takes place that pushes your body or the baseline even further than previous, and that is the super adaptation. And that is basically what you're out after. Basically, what you're out after. You want to give your body a stress, a stimulus, and then you have to allow your body to recover. And having this base phase in your training every season, every other season, it gives your body time to both build a strong base, but also to recover. Because if you would be running high intensity stuff every single time, you would be having a very deep curve down. And instead of going upwards when you recover, you might even plateau and just keep the same progress. Or even if you don't allow recovery at all, you would be digging yourself a hole where you go down in fitness. But yeah, what are some key characteristics? Sorry, English is not my first language, so it's very hard sometimes. But what are some key characteristics of this type of training or this phase of training? Well, you have a lot of low to moderate intensity, and that can be easy running and even threshold work. Yeah, and then you have the longer duration workouts, where because you have a little bit lower intensity focus, which doesn't require the same amount of energy output or power output as higher intensity stuff, you can do longer workouts. For example, the long run, if you traditionally do 90 minutes, easy long run, you could push it to 120 minutes, and so on, just because you have a little bit higher focus on the lower stuff, lower intensity stuff. And during this phase, you want to focus on strength and not specifically speed. And here you have to have strides, you have to have running drills and sessions to build power efficiency, not really top end speed, like track work. There's not a lot of track work benefits during this phase unless you do threshold work where you don't overstep the limit. But yeah, I have one session which is probably very famous, and that is the hill session of 200-meter repeats. And why I like this session so much is because it's kind of like an undercover speed work, where you develop power and leg turnover, but you don't get the same impact or strain as opposed to running on a flat surface. And this really puts an emphasis on the running technique, and it's also kind of threshold work, where it elevates your heart rate. You get the lactic acid feeling in your legs, but you're not running excessive amount for it to not be, for your body not being able to cleanse it out or rinse it. And this is what builds that aerobic strength and the fatigue resistance, and that is perfect for this phase of training. But it also, as I mentioned before, when you run uphill, you have to have good technique where you focus on the arm swing, you focus on the knee drive and pushing the hips forward. And running uphill does that perfectly. And yeah, that is why this session is so good. The 200 meters uphill with either jog, rest down, or walk down. It all depends on where you are at your fitness. So you might not even do 2 sets of 8 reps of 200 meters. You can do 1 set of maybe 6 times 200 meters. It all depends on where you are in your fitness. You can even jump it up to 2 times 10, 10 times 200 meters. And that is a session a lot of professional athletes use, more advanced runners use. But yeah, threshold training. I've been mentioning it throughout this presentation. Well, what is it? Well, it's kind of like the bread and butter of modern distance training. A lot of Norwegians and Swedish runners, European runners, have been facing a lot of success when doing this type of training. And what is it though? Well, it targets the intensity just below where the lactic acid can be cleansed by your body at a more efficient rate. And that we usually talk about 2 different thresholds, the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold. And running just below this threshold, it improves your ability to clear lactic acid. And this is a way to boost that mitochondrial density and the health of them, but also builds a lot of endurance. And you might know Jakob Ingebrigtsen or the Ingebrigtsen brothers. They've set the foundation for this type of training. And even in the Ironman space, where you have Blumenfeld and all the other Norwegian guys pushing this threshold approach. And most recently, Almgren, very good runner from the country I live in right now, Sweden. But yeah, I also did one lactate test in a lab where we tested my lactate thresholds, and these 2 arrows point out where my lactate thresholds is. So I can explain what the graph says. The green line is my lactate in millimoles per liter. So as you can see, when I ran at 11 kilometers an hour, I had 1.9 in lactate. And then it kind of went down as we increased the pace a little bit. And then at 14 kilometers an hour, it actually jumps a little bit from 1.2 to 1.6. And this small jump is where my first lactate threshold is, the LT1. And this is the aerobic threshold, where I start to produce a little bit more lactic acid than when running easy, but it's still manageable to clear out in a very, very effective way, so to say. And this is the pace where usually it is the marathon race pace or half marathon race pace, depending on your fitness. But yeah, when we jumped up the speed to 15 kilometers an hour, you can see that it increased quite a bit from 1.6 to 2.4. And then we jumped up the speed once again. Then you can see that it jumped from 2.4 to 3.6. So this jump signalizes that this is my upper aerobic lactate threshold, my anaerobic threshold. And yeah, this is probably around 10K race pace to half marathon race pace, depending on your fitness. And then you have my heart rate at every single interval. And that is quite important to note down if you want to do threshold focused intensity zones, but you can't afford a lactate meter or do a lot of lactate testing. So you look at what your heart rate was when or at your LT1 or LT2. But the problem is that heart rate can differ in a lot of because of a lot of reasons. So that is one of the reasons why people use lactate instead of heart rate. But threshold training, how should you be doing it? Well, because base training usually is comes after a little bit of a recovery season where you have a lot of days off, maybe you have to start slow. And with slow, I don't mean like only easy running, but if you're doing threshold work, you should be maybe starting out 15 seconds or 10 seconds slower than usual per kilometer. And also the reps needs to be kind of adjusted. You don't maybe start off with 8 times 1K. You start off with maybe 4 or 5 reps. But yet again, it depends on your fitness level. And then you have the question of, should I do continuous threshold or interval thresholds? Well, it depends on your long-term goal, but you should be doing both in a moderate amount, meaning that one week you focus on the continuous, or the other week you focus on interval. If you have one threshold session per week, if you have two, you can do a combination of both. And if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of time to run, who maybe only runs 2 or 3 times a week, you can do integrated thresholds where you focus on you can incorporate both. But what is continuous threshold? Well, usually when you run without rest. So it starts from around 20 minutes at the lower threshold, and after some weeks of doing it, you can go up to 40 and 50 minutes. And then you have the interval threshold, which usually starts at 1 minute and all the way up to 10 minutes. You can go further, you can go 12 minutes, 15 minutes, but this usually targets the higher threshold, the LT2 or anaerobic threshold. And the rest between the reps, it's all kind of individual, but you shouldn't really be having higher or longer rest than 3 minutes, because you still want to have the ability to clear lactic acid in between, but not too much where you return to baseline. And during the recovery, you can do jogging, because jogging between intervals, it can actually even cleanse the lactic acid even better and train your body to cleanse acid faster. And you should be gradually increasing the either the intensity or the reps, or not the intensity, sorry, either the reps or the duration, but you keep the intensity. You always want to keep it controlled. You want to be below that threshold or just at it. You don't want to go above. And or after some weeks of doing the threshold intervals, you can decrease the recovery from maybe 1 minute to 30 seconds if you're an advanced runner, or from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, or even 90 seconds. It all depends. But the longer the reps, usually the higher rest. But yeah, yet again, we talk about the fitness progress graph that we saw before. After a harder workout, quality workout, your body needs time to adapt. So don't overdo it, and don't overestimate, or don't go too fast on the threshold workouts, because you want to keep it controlled just at or below that threshold to have the most optimal adaptations and effect. So how should you be doing it? Well, you should start slow and increase your mileage over time. You don't want to have big jumps in mileage right here, but this is the part where you can have a lot of higher mileage than usual. And you should be having maybe 1 or 2 long runs per week. Most people have it during the weekends because they have a lot of time to run, but there's also the midweek long run that you can have, which is usually a very common session during the base phase. And strides are very important. After a long run, after easy runs, you should be doing strides. 10 to 15 seconds of fast running with good form, with 1 or 2 minutes walking rest between, or jogging if you're more advanced runner. You should also be having 1 or 2 threshold sessions every week where you target both the thresholds. You don't want to have too much focus on one. And then hill sessions is a great way to, or a great workout to add to this phase, but you have to do it with caution, because if you're not used to running up hills and with higher pace, it can be very taxing on the body. So keep that in mind. But yeah, there's a lot of questions that can be asked here. But yeah, most of it is individual. Like the pace, you can't really say a pace because it's all individual. Everyone has a different intensity at a different pace. And that is basically what I wanted to go through today. I hope it was informative or helpful in some way. If you have any comments, comment down below. And I'll see y'all in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. Take care. Bye.